Right, so let's start video 4 and we're going to pick up exactly from where we left off. If you recall, in the last video we used the level of harm chart to look at a specific problem question and to decide how easy it was to decide which offence we were looking at. We're going to look at that exact same exercise, but we're going to do it for the January 2011 scenario 1. Now, I appreciate that we're taking all of this out of context and out of order, but I think it's the easiest way for us to start is to make sure that we use the level of harm chart and that we get the offence right. I'm going to come back and do questions 1 and 2 at a later time, but I want to start and make sure that people have got their substantive answers sorted before we go any further. So let's take a look at this completely in the round. I have here the question from the January 2011 exam. You'll notice it, you'll recognise it. You should have downloaded the exam paper so as you can see it. And here I've got the two questions, question 3 and question 4. And all that we're simply going to do is to look at the offence. How we then write the question or write the answer, we're going to do in a separate video. But the important part, the starting point, is how do we write or how do we identify the offence? So the first question says, discuss Alan's criminal liability for his statement to Boo. We sort out thieves like you. Now this one's straightforward. There is no injury, there is no violence, there's no physical touching. Alan saw Boo at college, went up to her and said, we sort out thieves like you. Boo then hurries away in a panic. So easily, this is about the apprehension, the expectation. So Boo expects that Alan will use some form of unlawful personal violence on her. And it's always the case that those questions that ask you to decide a liability where there is just a statement and no touching at all, are always going to be assault. So we know that question 3 is dealing with assault. And we'll come back to that and how to answer that in the next video. Question 4 is slightly more complex. Question 4 says, discuss the criminal liability of Carol for the eye injury suffered by Boo. The eye injury is the critical part of the question here. And if we look at the scenario, it says Alan's friend Carol sprayed Boo with red paint. A small amount of paint went into Boo's eyes. She was taken to hospital where her eyes were treated to remove the paint. Now we can just get rid of that last sentence, partly because question 5 will talk about whether or not Carol caused the fracture to her skull. What we're talking about here is the paint injury into Boo's eyes. So let's apply the chart. And I'm going to work back to front. Can we genuinely say that the paint sprayed in Boo's eyes is really serious? My answer to that is going to be no. And it's going to be no for a number of reasons. The scenario tells us her eyes were treated to remove the paint, and then she goes home. Both of those two things in itself would imply that there was not really serious harm. So that then sort of starts to move us into either battery or section 47. Now battery says that the violence needs to be the merest touch. Well, it's certainly that. What we've got to decide is whether or not the merest touch extends to a level of harm that is calculated to interfere with the health and comfort of the victim. But that harm has to be more than merely transient and trifling, and not wholly insignificant. Well, there's a key word here that helps us, and this is this idea of transient. Transient means something that is short-lived, something that is passing through. Now, certainly, you could say that the paint in the eye is going to interfere with the health and comfort of the victim, Boo. But to be frank, because the paint has been removed, it's relatively transient. Boo, ignoring the fact that she hurts her skull later, Boo's injury is dealt with relatively quickly. So I would tend to suggest that Boo's injuries are going to be more a battery than they are ABH. Now, in terms of answering the question, and we'll see this when we look at the question specifically, we are going to have to argue that point in the answer. We are going to have to say it is either battery or it is ABH. I believe it is battery because, or I believe it is ABH because. And we are then going to have to discount the other one as a result. So our discussion in this question is going to be, is Boo's injury concerning her eye either battery or ABH? Is it either the merest touch, or is it a hurt or injury calculated to interfere with the health and comfort of the victim? I'm going to say that because that injury is probably quite transient, it doesn't last for long, it would come under the banner of battery. And so therefore, when I answer this question, I would answer it as being a battery. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to do question 3. We're going to look at how we write the answer to question 3, which is how we decide whether or not Alan's liability to Boo completes the full offence of assault. I hope that's given you some idea about how to use the level of harm chart, and I will do that on a number of specific examples to give you continued practice later on.